I thought I'd do it a little bit differently, and I'm very honored. Jane was the original editor on Friday Night Lights, really the one who discovered and inspired the book. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the process, what she saw in me. I'm still not sure, actually. And what compelled her. I was 34 years old. I was certainly unknown as an author. I wrote a 9-page proposal.
You're kidding.
No, it was double-spaced, 9 pages. It was pretty shitty. I looked at it recently, actually.
He is so wrong.
But it was very short, but it captured something in Jane's imagination. It was also a magical time in publishing. Jane had just started, I guess, a nonfiction, whatever, at Addison Wesley, and it was an exciting time in publishing where there was willing to take chances on, I've been a newspaper reporter for 15 years, but take chances on someone who was, as I say, unknown and had the kernel of an idea and had to shape that idea into a book that became Friday Night Lights, and really the defining forces in the book were Jane and then my former agent, Michael Carlisle. So, Jane, why were you stupid enough to take a chance on this?
Well, I could swear it was a 90-page proposal. It was so brilliant and
9 pages.
All right. There were 4 things. First of all, the story jumped off the page, and that doesn't happen a lot. Buzz's prose is so muscular, and both muscular.
Unlike myself, actually.
Right. Right. That was one. 2, he was a Triple Crown prize winner. He'd gotten a Pulitzer, he'd gotten a Livingston, and he was a Neiman Fellow. So I was not the only. My group was not the only people who thought he was a good writer. The 5th reason is that I worked for a bunch of jocks.
Well, that's right, you did.
I had started a New York office of Addison Wesley just on 16th Street and 5th, 101 5th, and they all loved sports, and they thought that, and when we were trying to buy the book, we loved the book. This book, known as Odessa, Texas, until the last moment, was the love child of the publishing company for those years. We thought that we could sell 20,000 copies of the hardcover in Texas because he had convinced us that high school football was the Texas mania. And we could break even if we sold 20,000 copies in Texas. So we wanted the book. Now we had to buy the book, and there were other people who were very enthusiastic about it too.
Yeah, I mean, Simon & Schuster, obviously a very, very big publisher, offered the most money. Actually, you topped it by $5,000, but it was Addison Wesley. They were a textbook publisher. Right. They had this nonfiction imprint. Who cares? They don't know what they're doing. And Jane won't mention the name, and I won't, but a very famous agent put her feet up on the desk and said, "Why would I possibly send any of my clients to you?"
At that place.
The reason you do it is because smaller is better, hands-on is better, bigger is not better, dedication is better, commitment is better, and a lot of these big publishing houses are not really publishing houses. They're book speculators. They don't really give a shit except about the big books, and it's now worse than ever. Because pretty much now we'll spend $5 million or $3 million or $2 million for a book, and then we'll spend $50,000 and throw it against the wall. So contrary to the advice of a lot of people, except for David Halberstam, actually, I went with Addison Wesley because I felt I could feel Jane's passion. She saw something there, this unformed idea, but formed enough to know that there was something in the water, really not of Texas, but of this country. The connection of high school football, what it symbolized, what it meant, particularly in rural and small and isolated communities across this country. Something was there. It was my agent who helped me find Odessa. And yeah, I won a lot of awards, but writing journalism is a hell of a lot different from writing a book.
Well, yes. One of the other things that Buzzy said, I think in the proposal or later, was that you went to Martha's Vineyard, or
I went to Nantucket.
Nantucket. Had a house in Nantucket. You would be there after Labor Day, as in this week, and you would see how the town would come alive about some high school sport.
The Nantucket Whalers. After all the tourists would leave and all the rich people who didn't appreciate the island would thankfully leave. The Whalers took over the town, and they won the Massachusetts Super Bowl 4 years in a row. There was a story written by Chuck McGrath in the New Yorker. So it wasn't just Texas. There was a phenomenon.
Exactly.
It was Western Pennsylvania. It was Ohio. It was Georgia. It was pretty much everywhere in the South. But it was also Nantucket, Massachusetts. And so I think we felt that if you got it right, if you really dug underneath and wrote a book, not a sports book, but a book about sports, maybe, although we never anticipated that we'd be sitting here boring you after 25 years, that maybe...
And gloating.
Maybe, no, not gloating, but maybe...
I'm gloating.
Maybe this book, would connect.
Right, but the notion of, it was more general for me. The choice of football was...
You didn't even like football, did you?
One day, you came in and you said something about Joe Montana, and I said, "Is he a football player?" And you were sitting on the couch.
And I know I was fucked when the editor doesn't know who Joe Montana is.
You banged your feet, your hands, your fists on your legs, and you said, "God damn it, Jane, you're editing a football book." I smiled sweetly because I'd been pretty brusque with you at times, but. What it meant to me was small town America coming alive, being saved. As the towns are dying, being saved by the passion of the town for its high school football team. I should tell you that a couple of years ago, I was in the Serengeti in Tanzania at a camp.
Is high school football big?
Well, let me tell you what happened. So I was sitting with a family from Tacoma. And the kids are very, very tall. 2 teenage kids, mom and dad. And they played hockey. And he was saying, so the dad was saying, he was the hockey coach. He said, it's hard to get money for hockey. It all goes to football. And I said, I once edited a book about football. And they said, well, I said, Friday Night Lights, and the teenage boy jumped from his seat and gave me a hug. He loved it so much. So there we were. Of course, it was...
And that was another, look, there was precedent for how important high school sports are, and it wasn't necessarily football. I'd worked in Minnesota. It was hockey in Minnesota. It was basketball in Indiana. The Hoosiers phenomenon, and, people have often asked, well, where'd you get the idea? And really the idea came from driving out west and going across the country and taking the southern route. So you go through Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, into Texas. And as Jane said, Main Street used to be the best place in America, filled Saturday night. People would walk down the street. This is where you socialized. This is where you mingled. Main Street in small town America was dead. Was absolutely dead. The Walmart effect was in play.
Yes.
The mall was in place. So what do you cling to? What do you dream about? What do you hope? Every community wants hope, and it just popped. I kept seeing these. There'd be a drought, and they'd be watering the stadium. It would be beautifully painted, and I just said, these are shrines. These are temples. This is what brings together community. On a Friday night, and then found Odessa, which really wasn't that hard because of its stature and its legendary status. In Texas, it was not a quintessential small town. It was 100,000 people, but it was so out there in West Texas, pretty much 300 miles from everywhere. And a town is bad in Texas when other Texans make fun of it. It was dusty. It was gritty. It was ugly. People there were tough. They were fierce. They were independent. And they had produced out of the ashes this really incredible, legendary, overachieving football team that had won more games than any team in Texas state history, and had won in the 1980s 4 state championships in what I would argue is the most competitive playoff bracket in sports. So there was a Cinderella quality that attracted us as well, but also a tremendous amount of darkness.
But also, by the time you found Odessa, you also arranged so that you would have access to the high school, that you would have access to the team, to the kids. I mean, this was not somebody going to games and reading the newspapers. You were totally immersed.
Yeah, I mean, you have to do that. Look, if you're going to write a book, either you're in for $1 or don't go in, because you had to immerse yourself. You had to be there. I've read books where you can tell that people are parachuting in. They show up for the weekend, they show up for 3 or 4 days, and the books suck. And they suck because they haven't breathed and felt and lived the culture. The only way to do this book was to get access, which I did. Of course, they regretted it terribly, but that's on them. But I moved. I moved there with my then fiance and my 2 boys who were twins who were 5 years old, and we lived there for a year. And what does that do? Not only are you soaking up the town, when you write, or at least when you figure out how to write with Jane's tremendous help, you're writing with authority. You're writing knowing that what you say really is the case. You're not guessing, you're not sensationalizing. Obviously, you're not making up. You know, I lived it, I saw it, because in a book like this, most of the reporting, a lot of what you do, you don't write down. You feel it. You know, you soak it in. You obviously do the interviews, but you get a feel for the town because you're there day after day after day. So that was an essential part as well. Access, and all right, I'm leaving my job at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I don't care. My editor thought I was nuts. He tried to talk me out of it.
And he's a great editor.
He was famous Gene Roberts. He dismissed the book. He said it was a stupid idea. No one would read it. High school kids won't talk to you. But, you know, you're at a time in your life, you're 34 years old, and you just feel it in your bones. It's that great moment in life where you're either going to do it or not. And I said I just had to do it. This was the book I felt I was meant to write.
Buzzy, when did you move? What month did you move down to Odessa?
I moved in July of 1988, and I knew I had a book, or I knew this was going to be a wild trip. I went with the coaches. They were coaching in the East-West Texas All-Star high school football game. And we all went together. There was myself and 10 coaches. The head coach was very cheap, so I got 1 hotel room. So I slept in a bed with 4 other coaches, one of whom was very rotund. We get to the game, and I swear this happened. It was very, very intense. There was a player from Permian who was in the game. The trainer was from Permian. He came out of the game basically sobbing. He was in so much pain, and the trainer said, "You're a pussy," gave him Tylenol, and he went back in there. He actually had a herniated disc. During the game, an official died. And, you know, it's someone's dead, right? You know, it takes some time to get him off the field, right? And you could see the coaches going, you know, and they were getting impatient, and of course the game continued. Well, that's when I knew that this is, you know, it's sort of like that great line in Apocalypse Now. I don't know where we're going, but one lucky you, and I know it's going to be hot. It was the immediacy of being in a culture, and that's what's great about reporting. The best reporting anyone does is where they don't know anything. It's all fresh. It's all new. So people say, what was it like being in Odessa? You're an East Coaster. Well, it was great, because as a reporter, everything is new. Everything is fresh. You pay attention to everything because your eyes are just wide open, you know, all the time. And that was absolutely essential.
But then toward the end of August, you thought you didn't have a book.
I guess that's right. And, you know,
you called me and said, "I think I better come home."
Did I say that?
Yep.
I must have missed you then. Did I really say that?
Yeah.
It's interesting what you block out of your mind. I mean, look, what happens in any project is fear.
Do you remember why?
I actually don't.
Booby.
Oh, right, which was right.
The last.
What happened was, God, I forget all this. This is interesting to me. It may not be interesting to you, but it's really interesting to me. The mainstay character of Friday Night Lights, for those who have read it and certainly will buy the new edition, because everyone needs 3 or 4. The mainstay character of the book turned out to be Booby Miles, but the mainstay of the book was the hope and the expectation that this team might win state, that this team would go to the playoffs, because they were ranked #1 in the preseason. So it's the end of August. It's dusk in Lubbock at Jones Stadium at Texas Tech. Booby Miles is the probably the best running back in the state of Texas. Watching him run on tape is watching sheer joy, sheer abandon, a man among the boys. In some way, almost like a LeBron James in his physique, how big he is, how strong he is, how tough he is. He runs a 10-200. He's 6'2", 200 pounds. He's mean, he's tough, and he just runs with this exquisite abandon. And he has waited all his life for his senior year because he's going to make it to college and to the pros and all these false dreams. And it's a meaningless preseason scrimmage. The first time he gets the ball, he goes for about 15 yards. It's a scrimmage. He says, I think I'm going to go out of bounds. I don't want to get hit. His cleat gets caught on the turf. Someone falls on his knee, and he tears his ACL. That's it. He's done. And in that brief millisecond moment, his life was really done in some ways. But he's gone. The star is gone. What's going to happen to the team? If they go 5-5, I ain't sitting here. And they've just lost their star. And I remember now calling Jane and said, this is disastrous. But Jane, like all good editors, has a way of settling you down, of calming your nerves, because this was a big deal for me. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And I feel pressure, and Jane was really great at, take a step back, take a step back, relax. You're here, you don't know how things are going to unfold, and you have to see how they unfold.
I knew there would be a story there. But what was so interesting about it was that the proposal, all 9 pages of it, proposed that it would be the story of this black kid whose IQ was not up to the level of college, who was going to be, he was the hope of the team, and the team was the hope of his life. And the book proposal was structured through the eyes and the experience of Boobie Miles, and he's out of the game. And so you had a good reason to want to be discouraged. I figured we'd find a story somewhere.
Well, as it turned out, be frank, it was probably the best thing that happened to me. It was probably the worst thing that happened to Boobie. This is how it goes when you're writing, because as it unfolded, you felt the absolute tragedy of what he was going through. But not only the tragedy, you saw this town immediately turn against him. They didn't like the fact that he was black. They'll argue about it to this day. But Permian was a white school. The myth of Permian was overachieving white boys doing incredible things. The blacks were only there to play football and, didn't really count for much. And so the minute Boobie got hurt, there was racial scorn. There was laughter when they found someone better. He was discarded. Before, when he was playing football, his tutor gave him the answers to all the tests. The courses he was taking were ridiculous. Teachers told me he's not worth teaching, he's not teachable, we just want to keep him eligible. He was not a stupid kid, he wouldn't be a rocket scientist, I know that. He was taking special ed courses because then you don't have to need a passing grade. Everything they did was in the name of making him a football animal. That's what Boobie was in their minds, and there are a lot of Boobie Miles out there. He was a football animal. Coaches, teachers saw his only value, his only possible value in playing football. If he didn't play football, I remember boosters laughing one day and suggesting, you know what you do to a horse that turns up lame? You shoot him. And maybe that's what Boobie Miles should think about. Now, this is an 18-year-old kid. There was a coach and a good guy. I said, what would Boobie be without football? And he said, well, he'll just be a big, dumb old nigger. An 18-year-old kid whose life had passed before his eyes, and part of the problem were the dreams he had. Part of the problem with the dreams that his uncle had. I remember meeting him for the first time, and he said, what do you want to do in life? Well, I want to play for the New York Jets because I like the color green. When he played football, as I said, his tutor gave him the answers to all the tests, so he was getting B+. When he stopped playing football, he was getting Fs, and he was paid to play. He was paid to play. As I found out after the book,
really? There
was a booster that every Monday would put in an envelope as many dollars as he had gained the previous Friday night. Well, one game he gained 305 yards. Well, $305 to a kid who was born on the bad side of the tracks, on the wrong side of the tracks, who really has nothing, who basically lives in a shack, is a lot of money. Now, I've talked to Booby
27 years ago, it was even more.
Right, and I've talked to Booby at length, and Booby blames himself. He says it was my fault I didn't study harder. I should have had my priorities straight, but that's ridiculous. And that's that's the problem with too much of sports. The attention paid to kids is worse than ever if you're a good athlete. You're identified as a good athlete younger and younger. You're encouraged to play only one sport, perhaps play that sport year round. You get put on a pedestal. You get a lot of exposure. You get a lot of fame because the internet and high school football and high school sports are on TV all the time. It's probably worse in basketball. But what happens if you don't make it? What happens if you get hurt? What happens? You're discarded. And the other tragedy is sports, under the right conditions, are one of the greatest motivators there is. I feel like it's lip service, but if it's done the right way with the right balance, the most impressive, the most dogged, the most disciplined, the most tireless people I've met were all former athletes. So there is a way to do it. But in Odessa, they didn't care. I mean, they discouraged kids from taking the SATs on Saturday because it interfered with breaking down the game films. The coach kept all the recruiting letters. So the kids didn't even know where they were being recruited.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I assume it's changed and it's gotten better, but the landscape in too many places is still, out of control. And the tragedy is under the right conditions, and I've seen it. I just did a story on a marvelous program, and the program director is here, Joel Sensor, called Harlem Lacrosse. And as he said, sports, sure, it's about winning, it's about competition, but it's about intervention. It can save kids. It can motivate kids in the right direction. And I have seen the incredible results, the most inspirational sports program that I've ever witnessed. And so it can be done, but in Odessa, it was only ever about winning.
So I told Buzzy to stay and follow the season. I also asked you to send me a letter occasionally.
Did I?
You did, occasionally.
See, I was a good Jewish boy.
Good Jewish boy. And there were two reasons why I wanted those letters. Number one, I wanted you to be able to take the opportunity to step back and write me to get a little distance from all of what you were experiencing. And the other is I wanted those letters because I knew my bosses, all the jocks, would just be so excited about the book every time they got a letter from you. So it was a joint thing, because as an editor, you're trying to manage the author, and you're also managing up. You're trying to make sure that the enthusiasm for the book never drifts.
Well, Jane is a phenomenal editor. Jane's love in editing has been to discover authors. She says that's where the fun part is, of taking an unknown and helping them shape and craft and make their material breathe. But, all authors are this weird, wonderful, toxic combination of confidence and complete insecurity. You go from day to day and moment to moment. Something happens that's interesting and you're euphoric. Something happens that's boring and you fall into the depths. And Jane was really good at saying just that. Take a step back. Don't get so involved. Although I did get involved in the kids' lives, and I love the kids. Yeah. Just take a step back. Breathe. You know what? Maybe even enjoy it. Observe. You're in a different place, in a different climate, and a different culture. You are not responsible for how the team is going to do. You're 5'6". You don't play football. And so I began to do that, and then bit by bit, this season unfolded in a way that no fiction writer could ever make up. So in anything you do, no matter how well you write it, no matter how well you do it, no matter how well you report it, there's still an element of luck, and I know that.
Well, luck and talent are intertwined in this story. When the TV series came out, I can't watch it because the sight, those opening shots, and my heart is in my mouth again. The anxiety in New York over what was going to happen that year. I was never worried about Buzzy's ability to write. We didn't know what was going to happen, and every game we could have lost. And it was so scary. And as an editor, one of the things you really don't do is buy a book where you don't know where the ending is. You know, people say there's going to be a trial, you know, cover the trial. Well, the trial could go on for 5 years and be a hung jury. We didn't know what was going to happen, and that the last game was a real downer.
Well, and that's why when Booby got hurt, I freaked out, because, you know, part of the calculation was this team was preseason was ranked #1 in the state. You had to have a team. They had to go to the playoffs. They had to go to the playoffs. If they didn't go to the playoffs, I guess you would have published it. But there's no resolution. There's no engine. There's no story. I remember Jane saying, as I was trying to write this thing fairly unsuccessfully at the beginning, she said, "Do you ever read mysteries?" And then I was trying to be Proustian. Why would I read a mystery? I was very dismissive. And she said, well, you read mysteries because they're storytellers. They know how to keep you going. They know how to tell a story. And at that point, she says, you have a great story, but you have to stop getting in the way of it. You have to be conscious of creating this narrative, of creating a narrative. It is all in the storytelling. But it got down to the last game of the regular season. Permian had lost to the cross-city rival by a point. There was the possibility they would not make the playoffs. It went down to a coin toss between 3 teams in an undisclosed location off the highway because they were afraid of riots, depending on who won and who lost. Well, forget about the coaches. Think about me. Because I'm sitting there. This is it. This is it. You know, whoever's odd person out. In other words, if it's 2 heads and a tail, the tail is out. Think about it. I know this is it. If Permian does not get in the playoffs, I'm done. I am done. I am done. The whole build-up to the playoffs, the excitement of the playoffs, I'm done. And by some miracle, despite one of the coaches trying to cheat, Permian made it into the playoffs, and then what unfolded after that was beyond belief, beyond absolute belief in terms of a scandal involving another school. And, you know, when that happened, I felt magic. I said, you know what? By a quirk of fate, this book may work. And then I started to write it, and it was a disaster.
Well,
it was.
So here it was not good. So here,
Jane,
Buzzy,
I thought you loved me.
Those first 2, I adore you. Those first 200 pages about the Permian, the making of oil under the whatever it was. Geology, 200 pages of the history.
John McPhee, basically.
Yeah. John McPhee never wrote 200 pages about so little.
Oh, he came close.
Yeah, I agree. So I brought, so Buzzy came to New York. I called his agent and said, we got to talk. He came to New York. And I infamously or famously said, Buzzy, if you keep on like this book is going to be longer than the rise and fall of the Third Reich, and you're no Bill Shirer. So we got rid of the...
Jesus, I'm getting really dissed here.
I was really mean.
No, but you basically said, no offense, Odessa is not Nazi Germany. and the book has... You know, but you weren't freaking out. I mean, you weren't freaking out because it's a first-time author. You got to clear your throat. The big mistake I made was starting to write it in Odessa. I needed distance. Right. I needed to get away from people I liked. I knew that as an honest reporter, you had to say things that had to be said. It was very hard to do in Odessa. It's a bleak place to write. But Jane called me and basically said, when are you going to be in New York? And I said, well, we're moving, I don't know, a week or two. And she said, well, how about tomorrow? Well, then I knew there was a problem.
Yeah, but once we got through the how oil is created under the earth.
I think that's fascinating. I think the book would have sold more copies if I had put that in.
I think you're right. You should, yeah. So then the question was, how do you structure the book? And it was a very interesting... I learned from working with you how you structure a work of narrative nonfiction was just beginning to emerge, and so we were in the forefront of creating narrative nonfiction, And we had this many games, and we had a great opening scene, which was the watermelon fest, because he could then introduce everybody. And then it was a question of making sure that each game had a player who was emblematic of that game. And that way you could write about the whole team, and you could tell the stories of the game, and you had a structure. You can't write a book without a structure. One of the things that is wonderful about journalists writing books is that their will has been broken by their newspaper editors.
Oh, God, is that true?
An expert will say, well, what do you know? But a writer will listen. And one of the difficulties of journalism is that you don't know the long form. You know how to structure a short piece, but not the arc of the long form. And that's what you had to learn.
Well, people have often asked me, how do you begin a book? How do you learn to write a book? And I remember exactly what happened. Jane took out index cards and took out a pen and started grilling me. All right, who were the main characters? Who did you respond to? And if I hemmed and hawed, because she wanted whatever comes to the surface first is what is of meaning to you. She said, what players? Well, Boobie Miles. I said, I know Boobie Miles. Who else? Well, the quarterback, Mike Winchell. Why? Why is he interesting? How does he drive the narrative? What does he symbolize? And so, Brian Chavez, Dom Billingsley, we get the players down. And then she said, the games. Well, there were 16 games. Well, I thought the Amarillo game was interesting. Well, why is it interesting? What does it do? How does it advance the narrative? How does it advance the characters? What does it symbolize? No, forget it. Well, Odessa High, because it showed it showed the schism of the town, the rivalry between old school and new school, and the schism and the resentment that the old school had now become predominantly Latino. All right, that's interesting. That's about the racial demographics of the school. That goes in. Midland Lee, well, you have to write about that because that was so dramatic, and it meant possibly they weren't going to make the playoffs. And you're putting it on index cards, but it's moving. You're moving fast. You don't have time to linger. You don't have time to procrastinate, because fear and procrastination are the worst enemies of the writer. It is really, really easy to freeze up and get terrified. And I did write. I wrote 30,000 words, and we kept about 5,000. Yeah. Because I also was afraid to dive in. I was afraid to say things that I had to say, and I really didn't have any clue of how do I introduce this? How do I introduce that? And at the end of these 2 hours, we had the index cards up, we had the chapters up, and that was when I saw the book. And after that, it took, I think, 4 months to write. It was orgasmic. I don't know how else to describe it. It was so exciting and so delicious once you have the structure. And by the way, when I started writing, I didn't outline because I thought outlines were for pussies. I'm a book writer now, and I don't need no stinking outline. Well, if you don't outline, if you don't go through that exercise, you are going to be screwed. But once we got it down, once you do index cards chapter by chapter, because index cards, you can move them around. All right, Boobie Miles is here. When's he going to be in next? Is it too long? Is it too long in between chapters? Pace. What's the action? What's the storytelling? How are you going to make it come alive? How are you going to keep the reader engaged? You guys read a lot of books that are great, but they don't keep the reader engaged, because the other enemy of writing are lousy editors. Too much shit in there. Too much crap in there. Writers hate to let go. They hate to let go. And Jane was really good at saying, let it go. Let it go. How oil was created is for God. It's not for you to write about. But once you get that structure down, you feel it in your bones, and it was fantastic. And the book wrote itself, and then you find your voice, and then you find what every person needs in every walk of life is not just the writer, confidence. This is going where I want it to go. I can do this. This is singing. This is exciting. You wake up every day, and I discovered that confidence. And I can tell you, with many other editors, this thing would have sucked. Because so many editors then and now are not editors, they're book speculators. They speculate. They're like traders on Wall Street. And that's what they do. They do not like to edit, and I've been lucky to have great editors in all my books.
You've had.
I have.
Yeah.
I have. Eamon Dolan has been a great editor. John Karp was a good editor, and they roll up their sleeves and they edit. But many, I think, do not.
Well, yes. Are we at the end of our time?
Open for Q&A, whenever you're good.
Yeah, whenever if people want to jump in with questions, but I really do want to say that this book became what it was because of Jane. So it really is an honor. We don't see that much of each other, but we keep in touch by email. Do I believe in fate? I don't know, but I think it was fate that drew us together to create this very special, magical book that is now in its 25th year. It's like the Energizer Bunny. We just can't get rid of it. It goes on and on and on and on, but it was a magical moment for me, and in some ways a difficult moment, because to have that success so early in your life when you're 34 and it's your first book is hard, because everyone wants to better themselves, and I'll never do anything that's going to sell as much. I'm never going to do anything that's going to have the same type of acclaim and attention. And when the TV show came out, people said, "What do you think of the TV show?" I didn't watch it. I didn't want to watch it. I was tired of it. And at that point, other people were appropriating Friday Night Lights for their own benefit. It took me a year to get credit for the television show, which is the way Hollywood works. And I just didn't want to hear about it anymore. It had become a noose around my neck until, as my father pointed out, this is a good problem to have. It is a good problem to have, so shut up and take the royalties.
And speaking, all I can say is even rarer than a best-selling writer is a grateful author. So here's to you, Buzzy.
Well, thank you. Now, if there are questions, don't be shy. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Can be very stupid answers, but no such thing. Sure.
Yeah, I'm curious of your thoughts on the Nick Foles trade, and if you had any contact with him after that the feature you wrote.
I guess about a year ago, I wrote a feature piece in Philadelphia Magazine about Nick Foles, who was then the starting quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. I was prescient in predicting that he would suck, particularly in Philadelphia, because he didn't have the confidence that was necessary to be a quarterback. As it turned out, he did not have a good year, and he's now been traded to the Rams, where I think he could have much more success. I think it's a much better market for him. Philadelphia is a very, very difficult media market, and I think it became withering. I have no animosity towards him. I think he learned a lot last year about growing up, about humility, and I think with the right team and frankly the right offensive line that gives him time, I think he can be a good quarterback. And he's a good guy. He's a good guy. Well, this is good for the audience. There are no questions, right?
When you first arrived in Odessa, how were you treated by the people? Like, were they skeptical of you because you're a reporter, an outsider, worried about anything?
No. I mean, and look, there's been a lot of controversy about the book when it came out. The people in Odessa, you screwed us, you betrayed us, you're a typical Yankee. Well, none of that was true, because they knew my credentials. They knew I'd won a Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. They knew I was from the East Coast. And by the way, this was a very media-savvy community when it came to football, because when you win a state championship, you're getting publicity in television all over the state. You're getting feature stories all over the state in big-time newspapers. So they knew, and yes, they were excited. And if you look at the proposal, this was going to be a very uplifting book. The hook, frankly, would be the irony of a black kid in a town that did not desegregate until 1982 by court order. Here's this black kid from the wrong side of the town in a 80% white school that's leading them to the promised land. Now, it morphed into a lot of different things. We had no idea about the racism that would be directed towards Booby.
It wouldn't have been if he hadn't been hurt.
No, it wouldn't have been. It would have been, it would have been more subtle, but it probably would not have been. We had no idea, what would unfold. But I was there as a reporter, and they knew that. I didn't hide behind behind bushes to take quotes. And you could not, no one could write this as a Hoosiers story. And I think the town over time has realized that and stopped reading the sensational portions of the book and read the whole book, which has a lot of affection for the kids, celebrates the pageantry and spectacle of the game, which makes sports so difficult. It's exciting. It's great. I love football. I love watching it. Those sporting events at Permian with 19,000 fans on a Friday night in the West Texas plains with that wind running across on those Friday night lights, there is nothing more powerful. There is nothing more beautiful. More beautiful. And Whitney knows. Whitney grew up, she told me this tonight. Whitney grew up in a town of 15,000. How big was the high school?
My graduating class was like 250.
All right, 250. They win the 2A or 3A state championship.
3A state champs, 2009.
In order to, and as celebration, they built an indoor football complex.
Woo.
Well, that's sick, man. And exciting,
but
but you know, it's the push and pull. That's why sports is complicated. People said, you know, is an English class going to attract 19,000 people? Absolutely not. But I maintain this to this day. These kids were smart. What that was demanded of them on the football field every week, plays, tendencies, breaking down film, repetition over and over and over again, that can be translated to other areas. And if you use sports, if you think about it as intervention, as a savior, as something that keeps kids in school, and then you introduce the academic component, then you have something incredibly, incredibly powerful. And that simply was, you know, was not the case. And I really do forget your question, but I gave a really long answer. I apologize.
They were so mad when the book came out.
They were mad.
That we were going to send him to Midland. I don't think there was a bookstore.
No, there was one bookstore in Odessa, and they were going to send me down. And people called the bookstore and said, if that guy comes down, we're going to kick the crap out of him. And you know, it wasn't a prank. People in Odessa do that. People, it's a rough town. Their sacred cow had been punctured. They were embarrassed, and we canceled the book signing. And I have to tell you, the death threats are really good for books. Because there were death threats, and my agent got placed in the New York Times a story by Roger Cohen in which he described me as the Salman Rushdie of America. That's what got the book rolling. We can talk about how good it was, or this it was, or that it was. That's what got the book rolling. And Jane, I appreciate your calling the bookstore to threaten my life. That was a really, really good move.
That's right. I called the White House when Nixon was being impeached, because I had a book about the constitutionality of impeachment just in the bookstores from a Yale law professor. I called and said, would you please tell the president not to resign because I want to sell more books? They'd say, oh, thank you, who is this? I'd hang up because they were tapping all the phones. So I will do almost anything to sell a book, it is true.
So I'm going back down to Odessa next week. If you want to, you can even shoot me in the knee. I don't care. You know, let's get this 25th anniversary edition popping. Sure.
Hey, sorry about shifting gears just quickly here. Sorry about the pun, but has the buzz from the Caitlin story, which was quite good, by the way, has that died down? Is there any follow-up there, or has you just moved on?
No, I mean, I still keep in touch with Caitlin. I actually had dinner with her Friday night, and as we're walking out of the restaurant, someone had leaked the fact that they're there. I have a propensity to like to wear flamboyant clothing. Came out, there were these strobe lights. It was weird. They're taking pictures, and the Daily Mail identified me as Caitlin's new mystery date. Now the problem with the picture is she's 6'2", I'm 5'6", so many people also suggested this would be a sequel to Twins with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. She's doing really well. I don't know what the next move for her is. There is perhaps talk of doing a book. She may be tapped out. I can say I believe what she did was incredibly brave. You know, it's incredibly brave when you walk into any situation and everybody is staring at you. It's incredibly brave to believe in yourself and to be willing to change yourself at the age of 65. That's unheard of. There are very few things in life you can do that are more momentous than changing sex, particularly if you were Bruce Jenner. She's happy. And it's not just because she looks great. She's happy. She's happy being herself, which is not so easy in America. Difference is not celebrated, and this is something I know about and I've talked about. So I give her remarkable kudos. The show is done okay, not great, but she's not isolated anymore. When I saw her, she was incredibly isolated. She was really a prisoner of the paparazzi and of not wanting to go out because she was in this strange netherworld. She didn't, she looked strange. But now she's really happy. And the other cool thing was how many people came up during the dinner just to want to shake her hand and say thank you. And say, I really admire your courage. And whatever you think of anything, she did introduce difference, and not just transgender men and women. She introduced difference into the conversation. And there are very few figures in sports who have ever made that kind of difference. And I think the last one, frankly, was Muhammad Ali. And that's pretty amazing.
Would you write the book?
I don't know. I mean, there's talk of doing it. My concern is that what is there, beyond the Vanity Fair piece? Obviously, you can go into more depth and more detail. And I think in order to do a book like this, and I don't think publishers want that, she needs time to grow. I mean, she's a teenage girl. That's very much a common phenomenon. She's giddy. She's euphoric. She needs to really, what is it like to be a woman? What issues do you face? Are there going to be regrets? Are you still lonely? Did it solve all your problems? There are a lot of factors involved in being a transgender man and woman. There are a lot of studies that have been done that people don't want to talk about the issue of regret. And that means a real book that doesn't come out for a long time. And, America, the most amazing thing about Caitlyn Jenner, it actually lasted for 3 days until we went on to something else, which in our society is pretty incredible.
All right, final question.
Did you watch the football games on the field or in the stands?
I watched them on the field because actually it's a good question. You don't see much, but you hear the sounds, the hits. I mean, these kids went after it. And this was not a day and age of where anyone cared about concussions. I mean, you got a concussion, they didn't know what it was, and you went back out there. And, you just sort of see the interplay. You can hear I wanted to hear the sound, because you can go back and always look at the game tape. I wanted to hear that visceral sound. It's part of the reason, as I said, you're there to soak up the atmosphere. It's not that I wrote about it. You want to hear the sound. You want to hear the conflict. You want to hear the battle. You want to hear the roar, and the only place to do that is right on the field. When I began, I would ask the coach questions during the game, and he said, I just don't think this is going to work this way. You have to be quiet. So anyway, I thank all of you for coming. There's some people dear to me in the audience. My son, Caleb, my high school roommate, Bruce Bruckman, is the most maniacal person I ever met, and a former All-American lacrosse player. He's quite sick, actually. Joel, the Slaughters, and a lot of other people. Well, thank you all for coming, and Jane has family here as well.
Yes, I think that my family has gone home because it's the first day of school and bedtime. One of my son's daughter-in-law and 2 grandchildren. But I have an 11-year-old grandson, and just this spring, I gave him one of my copies of Friday Night Lights. And I'm hoping, I can't wait to hear what he has to say. He's been waiting to be old enough to read this book.
And how old is he?
He's 11.
Yeah, and look, why is it a timeless book? I mean, I don't know. I actually do know, because thousands of people have now told me that. It was a story that many could identify with. It wasn't the controversy. That was eye-opening. But so many people said, that was my high school. I was one of those kids. I remember those Friday Night Lights. I remember the impact on me. I remember the camaraderie and the teamwork and the love of teammate that you only get in high school. College is so professional now, and some of these high school teams in Texas are semi-pro teams because the rich suburbs now rule. They have professional trainers because they're rich enough to afford them. They're playing in stadiums. Yes, one cost $60 million. Its foundation crumbled. They had to rebuild it. Katy, Texas built a stadium for $58 million that seats 10,000. These are basically semi-pro teams. And, there's a limit. the quarterback of the state-winning team in Texas, Allen, had 300,000 Twitter followers. This is a kid in high school. That's great until he doesn't make it. If he doesn't make it. And I think, and I'll stop, and I'm concerned about this, I think we do great damage to minority kids. We sell them this constant bill of goods, sports, sports, sports. It's the only positive role models they see, and it's not good because they believe that you have a better chance of being a football player or a basketball player in the pros than you do being a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor. Anyway, I'm preaching, and I'll shut up. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.